A dark night in Salt Lake City suddenly turned into a nightmare for the Smart family. 14-year-old Elizabeth vanished from her bedroom, while her younger sister, an unwilling witness, froze in terror beneath the covers. Who could have dared to break into their home and abduct the girl, leaving her family in utter despair? A massive search operation was launched, yet the abductors always seemed one step ahead. 9 months of fear, hope, and relentless pursuit. This is a story that shocked the world and proved that resilience can triumph over darkness. Elizabeth Ann Smart, a 14-year-old girl from Salt Lake City, Utah, lived in a large and loving family where she was the eldest of 6 children. The Smart family was well known for their deep religiosity, active involvement in the community, and the harmonious atmosphere of their home. Elizabeth was a talented young girl with a passion for music and sports, her future shining with promise. June 5, 2002, began as an ordinary day for the Smart family. Elizabeth spent the evening with her family before retiring to her bedroom, which she shared with her younger sister, 9-year-old Mary Catherine. The night was calm, with no sign of the tragedy that was about to unfold. At around 2 a.m., danger entered the Smart household. An unknown man broke in through a window leading to the living room. Armed with a knife, he moved silently, appearing to know exactly where he was headed. The intruder entered the girl's bedroom and woke Elizabeth, commanding her to follow him. He threatened her with the knife, warning that he would kill her and her entire family if she screamed or attempted to escape. Mary Catherine woke to the sounds of whispering in footsteps. Frozen with fear, she watched the scene from beneath her blanket, her instincts urging her to feign sleep to avoid becoming the next target. Despite her terror, she managed to observe a few critical details. The kidnapper's voice was low but assertive, and his manner of speaking felt eerily familiar. Obeying the man's orders, Elizabeth followed him. He led her through the house, bypassing the rooms where her parents and siblings were sleeping, and took her out into the backyard. From that moment, Elizabeth vanished without a trace. At dawn, when her parents discovered Elizabeth's absence, panic erupted. Lois Smart, her mother, immediately called the police. A frantic search of the house revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. The kidnapper had been so meticulous that both the family and authorities were left bewildered. Mary Catherine's account became the sole clue to initiate the investigation. She mentioned men the family had previously hired for odd jobs around the house and recalled the name of one of them, Emmanuel. She was certain the voice of the abductor resembled that of this man. However, it would take time for the police to connect this lead to a real person. That night marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal for the Smart family and for Elizabeth herself, who found herself in the clutches of a ruthless kidnapper whose motives and plans were yet to be uncovered. The disappearance of Elizabeth Smart sent shockwaves to her close-knit community. From the early morning hours of June 5, 2002, the Smart family and law enforcement launched an extensive search. Volunteers, consisting of neighbors and friends, scoured nearby areas, parks, forests, and vacant lots around Salt Lake City. Yet, time worked against them. With every passing moment, the likelihood of finding Elizabeth grew slimmer. The police promptly held a press conference to draw public attention to the case. Elizabeth's parents, Lois and Ed Smart, made an emotional plea to the kidnapper on camera, begging for their daughter's safe return. Lois's heartfelt words echoed across the nation, "Please, we will do whatever you want, just bring our girl home." This poignant appeal garnered an outpouring of sympathy and support from millions of Americans. Elizabeth's younger sister, Mary Catherine, played a crucial role in the investigation. She recalled that the abductor had addressed Elizabeth by name, suggesting that he knew her beforehand. Furthermore, she insisted she recognized his voice. Summoning her courage, Mary Catherine shared her suspicion with the police. The kidnapper might be a man named Emmanuel, who had once done work around their home. Following this lead, investigators began scrutinizing everyone who had prior contact with the Smart family. However, without a full name or an address for Emmanuel, the trail proved elusive. Several composite sketches were created, but they were too generic to produce a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the media launched an aggressive campaign. Television networks, radio stations, and newspapers circulated Elizabeth's photograph in the hope that someone might recognize her. Posters bearing her image were plastered across Salt Lake City. Alongside her pictures, depictions and descriptions of a potential suspect were also distributed. Despite these efforts, the investigation stalled in its early weeks. False leads and unsubstantiated sightings trickled in. In one instance, a witness claimed to have seen a girl resembling Elizabeth dining with a suspicious couple in a neighboring state, but the lead turned out to be a dead end. Amid the media frenzy, dangerous theories began to surface. Some speculated that a family member or someone within their inner circle might have been involved in the abduction. This speculation sowed mistrust between the police and the Smarts, despite the family's unwavering cooperation with the investigation. Still, the Smart family refused to give up hope. They continued working with law enforcement, organizing rallies, and maintaining a strong public presence. Lois and Ed Smart gave daily interviews, emphasizing their belief that Elizabeth was still alive. Unbeknownst to everyone, Elizabeth was being held mere miles from her home. Trapped in isolation, she was forced to comply with the demands of her captors, Brian David Mitchell and his wife, Wanda Barzee, who maintained a terrifying grip on her life and safety. Yet these details remain hidden from the police, who pressed on, determined to uncover any clue that might lead them to her. Weeks after the abduction, Mary Catherine remembered additional details about Emmanuel. She recounted that he not only worked around their house but also spoke frequently about religion, coming across as eccentric and peculiar. With her assistance, the family helped the police develop a more accurate composite sketch. While this new information was a significant step forward, months of painstaking investigation lay ahead before justice could finally be served. Elizabeth Smart's life was irrevocably altered the moment she was taken. Her kidnapper, Brian David Mitchell, who called himself Emmanuel, led her into the mountains just miles from her home. There, hidden from prying eyes, lay a makeshift camp where his wife and accomplice, Wanda Barzee, awaited. The camp, a crude survivalist haven, consisted of ramshackle tents and improvised shelters that offered little more than protection from the elements. Yet it symbolized the isolation that would define Elizabeth's existence. On the very first night, Mitchell subjected her to a twisted marriage ceremony, claiming she was now his spiritual wife, ordained by God. Under the guise of this deranged ritual, he began abusing her, insisting that her submission was divinely decreed. Elizabeth's captivity was both physical and psychological. Mitchell wielded threats against her family like a weapon, ensuring her compliance. He repeatedly reminded her that any attempt to escape would result in him returning to the Smart home to harm her loved ones. These threats, reinforced by his fanatical religious rhetoric, rendered the idea of escape unthinkable. Wanda Barzee, while subservient to Mitchell, played an active role in Elizabeth's imprisonment. She participated in the abuse and closely monitored Elizabeth to ensure her obedience. Barzee viewed Mitchell as a prophet fulfilling a divine mission, wholeheartedly embracing his warped beliefs and lifestyle. Elizabeth's days were filled with fear and degradation. Forced to wear long, concealing robes that covered her face and body, she became unrecognizable to anyone who might see her beyond the camp. The harsh conditions of the mountains added to her suffering oppressive heat in the summer, bitter cold in the winter. Malnutrition became yet another ordeal, as Mitchell and Barzee lived on meager rations obtained sporadically. Even in these inhuman conditions, Elizabeth clung to hope. She drew strength from memories of her family and the life she had once known, using them as a lifeline to maintain her sanity. While outwardly compliant, she nurtured an inner resilience, determined to survive. Mitchell occasionally took Elizabeth and Barzee into nearby towns to scavenge for food and supplies. During these excursions, they walked among people in stores and public spaces, but Elizabeth was so heavily disguised that no one recognized her. Mitchell's threats were ever present, a chilling reminder that her silence was the price of her family's safety. Periods of isolation alternated with Mitchell's fanatical sermons about his prophetic plans. He claimed he was destined to gather a group of spiritual wives and create a new kingdom. Elizabeth, he declared, was the first of these wives. His delusional proclamations only highlighted his unpredictability and the grave danger he posed. However, the kidnappers began making mistakes. Their appearances in public places drew attention, and reports of a strange couple, accompanied by a veiled girl, began to trickle in. While the information was vague and unsubstantiated, it marked the beginning of a trail for law enforcement to follow. Elizabeth endured this nightmare for months, each day stretching into what felt like an eternity. Yet, despite the unrelenting darkness, a fragile spark of hope remained alive within her. She held on to the belief that one day, she would return to her family. Months passed after Elizabeth Smart's abduction, and the investigation remained mired in stagnation. Despite a widespread media campaign that distributed her photo and description, none of the tips received led to a breakthrough. Law enforcement found itself chasing false leads and speculative theories, losing precious time in the process. One of the most significant early missteps involved the investigation's misplaced focus on Richard Ricci, a handyman who had previously worked at the Smarts' home. Ricci's criminal history, which included theft, and his familiarity with the property made him a prime suspect. Police detained him for questioning and searched his home, yet no evidence connected him to Elizabeth's disappearance. Nevertheless, he remained the primary suspect for weeks. This misjudgment diverted substantial resources away from pursuing the actual kidnappers. Tragedy struck when Ricci died from a brain aneurysm while in custody, leaving investigators without their sole suspect and no closer to uncovering the truth. His death was a devastating blow to the investigation, further delaying progress. Meanwhile, despair grew within the Smart family. Their faith in law enforcement faltered, prompting Lois and Ed Smart to take matters into their own hands. They organized community meetings, distributed flyers, and sought support from religious and charitable organizations. Their unwavering determination kept Elizabeth's case in the public eye. A pivotal development came with the release of a composite sketch based on Mary Catherine's recollections. Over time, her memory of the man known as Emmanuel grew clearer. The sketch was widely circulated in newspapers and on television, gradually gaining recognition. Still, no one was yet able to connect it to a real person. The investigation was further hampered by a flood of false reports and sightings from concerned citizens. Witnesses from across the country claimed to have seen Elizabeth, leading police to chase leads that often turned out to be dead ends. One particularly high-profile misstep occurred in August 2002, when a man in Salt Lake City reported seeing Elizabeth with a couple resembling Mitchell and Barzy. The tip caused a media frenzy but ultimately proved unfounded, as the witness had merely mistaken strangers for the kidnappers. Meanwhile, Brian David Mitchell continued to move with Elizabeth and Barzy, deliberately avoiding areas where they might be recognized. His eccentric religious declarations and unusual behavior often drew attention. In several instances, people noticed the veiled girl accompanying the pair, but their observations were either not reported to the police or dismissed as unsubstantiated. A critical flaw in the investigation was the lack of coordination among law enforcement agencies and an inability to efficiently process public tips. While the search remained stalled, Elizabeth languished in captivity, just miles from her family's home. Refusing to give up, the Smart family enlisted private investigators and sought assistance from national organizations dedicated to finding missing children. These efforts ensured that Elizabeth's case stayed in the public spotlight, a factor that would later prove instrumental in her rescue. At this stage, however, the investigation was still at an impasse. Mitchell and Barzy, emboldened by law enforcement's struggles, felt secure in their actions, while police remained focused on false leads, missing crucial opportunities to bring Elizabeth home. While police continued searching for Elizabeth Smart in the vicinity of Salt Lake City, Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy began moving to avoid detection. Aware of the risk of staying near the abduction site, they decided to travel further afield. Elizabeth's disguise, consisting of long white robes, a cloak, and a veil, rendered her virtually unrecognizable, allowing the kidnappers to travel freely without arousing suspicion. Their first significant journey took them to California. Traveling mostly on foot, they occasionally camped in remote areas or stayed in deserted locations. Mitchell proclaimed that he was on a divine mission to preach the word of God, with Elizabeth and Barzy as his chosen companions. His religious rhetoric served as a tool of manipulation, reinforcing his control over Elizabeth and compelling her compliance. In California, they ventured into towns to procure food and beg for money. Mitchell often delivered street sermons, his unkempt beard, tattered clothing, and eccentric demeanor drawing attention. Yet no one suspected that one of his companions was a missing girl listed on federal alerts. Elizabeth occasionally attempted subtle signals to those around her, but Mitchell's constant threats of violence against her family kept her paralyzed with fear. He repeatedly warned her that any escape attempt would result in him returning to kill her loved ones, maintaining her in a state of perpetual terror. Over the months, Mitchell moved between Utah, California, and Nevada, adhering to a strategy of isolation and frequent relocation. His attempts to recruit new, spiritual wives led him to approach young women on the streets, but these efforts proved unsuccessful. His behavior further underscored his fanaticism and his willingness to break societal and legal boundaries in pursuit of his delusions. By December 2002, Mitchell decided to return to Salt Lake City, viewing it as the symbolic culmination of his spiritual journey. By this point, Elizabeth had been in captivity for over 6 months. Though she remained resilient in spirit, her isolation deepened with each passing day. Returning to Utah significantly increased the risk of capture. By then, Elizabeth's photograph was known to nearly everyone in Salt Lake City. Posters with her image adorned public spaces, and announcements about her disappearance played regularly on radio and television. Nevertheless, Mitchell, emboldened by his self-assurance, continued to frequent populated areas, relying on Elizabeth's disguise and silence to keep them safe. A pivotal moment occurred during a visit to the Salt Lake City Library, where the group's odd appearance drew attention. Elizabeth, entirely veiled, sat quietly, avoiding eye contact and exuding a sense of profound despair. A library patron, unsettled by the trio, reported them to the police. However, due to a lack of concrete descriptions or evidence, the tip failed to lead to their capture. Mitchell's behavior grew increasingly reckless. His impassioned religious rants, eccentric mannerisms, and peculiar appearance began to draw more attention. People started to notice the strange group, and reports of a suspicious man accompanied by 2 women began trickling into law enforcement with greater frequency. While Mitchell's interstate travels helped him evade capture temporarily, they also heightened the likelihood of exposure. For Elizabeth, these journeys were another chapter of her imprisonment, but by early 2003, the tides were beginning to turn. The net around Mitchell and Barzy was tightening, and Elizabeth's ordeal was nearing a crucial turning point. By early 2003, Elizabeth Smart's case remained unresolved, but pivotal events began to shift the tide. After months of frustration and false leads, the investigation refocused on the suspect mentioned by Mary Catherine, Emmanuel. The turning point came with the release of a composite sketch based on her recollections. In late February 2003, Lois Smart saw the sketch and immediately recognized the man who had once worked at their home. He had introduced himself as Emmanuel, claiming to be a wandering preacher. The Smart family contacted the police and urged the media to circulate the sketch widely. This image became a breakthrough, as individuals familiar with Brian David Mitchell recognized him and reported his true identity along with stories of his erratic behavior. The public now played a critical role. In March 2003, a Salt Lake City resident, upon seeing the sketch, realized it resembled a man he had seen delivering religious sermons on the street. He passed this tip to law enforcement, reigniting the investigation. On March 12, 2003, the decisive moment arrived. Mitchell, Barzy, and Elizabeth were walking through Sandy, a suburb of Salt Lake City, heading toward the city center. A passerby, who had seen the published sketch, recognized Mitchell and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers intercepted the trio. Elizabeth, still veiled, initially refused to identify herself, paralyzed by the fear of Mitchell's lingering threats. However, after persistent questioning from one officer, she finally revealed her name: "I am Elizabeth Smart." The news spread across the nation like wildfire. After 9 harrowing months of captivity, Elizabeth was rescued. Her parents, who had never lost hope, embraced her with tears and relief as they were reunited. Mitchell and Barzy were arrested on the spot and taken into custody, where interrogations began. Mitchell continued to insist that his actions were guided by divine command, framing his crimes as part of a supposed spiritual mission. Barzy supported his delusions, denying her culpability entirely. Despite everything she had endured, Elizabeth demonstrated remarkable strength and composure. She provided investigators with a detailed account of her captivity, describing how Mitchell had exploited religious dogma to justify his abuse. Her testimony would later become the foundation for the prosecution's case. Elizabeth's rescue was the result of unwavering collaboration between her family, the media, and the public. Individuals who noticed Mitchell and Barzy's unusual behavior and reported their sightings played a vital role in bringing Elizabeth home. The moment marked not just the end of Elizabeth's ordeal, but also the triumph of perseverance and hope, uniting a community and a nation in celebration of her safe return. Elizabeth Smart's return home marked the long-awaited end of her 9-month ordeal, but it was also the beginning of a complex process of investigation, justice, and healing. Upon her rescue, law enforcement faced the task of confirming her identity and gathering the evidence needed to bring Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy to justice. Despite the fear and psychological suppression instilled by months of abuse and manipulation, Elizabeth swiftly confirmed her name. Her detailed descriptions of her captors, their mountain camp, and their treatment of her provided crucial evidence for the impending legal proceedings. Her clear and precise recollections would later prove instrumental in securing convictions. Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy were immediately arrested. Police began searching the camp in the wooded area near the Smart home. There, they found tents, personal items belonging to Elizabeth, and Mitchell's religious texts and notes, which contained his deranged, prophetic teachings. These writings revealed his intention to continue abducting young girls to build his group of spiritual wives. Elizabeth's rescue quickly became a national story. Her return home was broadcast across all major news outlets, capturing the attention of millions. Her parents, Lois and Ed Smart, held a press conference to express their profound gratitude to the police, volunteers, and everyone who had never given up hope. For the Smart family, this was a moment of immense joy but also the start of a long road to recovery. Elizabeth needed protection from the intense media scrutiny, as well as professional support to address the deep psychological scars left by her captivity. Her parents decided to prioritize her well-being, limiting her public appearances in the months following her rescue. One of the most pressing questions after Elizabeth's return was how she had managed to survive in such dire circumstances. Elizabeth explained that her unwavering faith in her family and hope for a future reunion had sustained her. Her resilience and ability to preserve her sanity in inhumane conditions amazed even the most seasoned investigators. The investigation into the handling of the case also began. Many criticized the prolonged duration of the search, particularly the delay in identifying Mitchell as a suspect. It became clear that Mitchell's arrest could have occurred much earlier if the composite sketch and information from the Smart family had been processed more efficiently. Mitchell, detained alongside Barzy, continued to claim that his actions were part of a divine mission. However, it quickly became evident that his religious justifications would not shield him from accountability. Barzy, though less defiant, also denied her guilt, justifying her actions by citing her complete subservience to Mitchell. March 12, 2003, became a symbol of the power of hope and collective determination. On this day, Elizabeth not only regained her freedom but also inspired millions with her story of survival, demonstrating that even in the darkest of times, faith and resilience can prevail. Following the arrest of Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzy, the arduous process of holding them accountable began. The case drew national attention, with the public and media closely following the proceedings. Central to the trial was the question of the mental state of both defendants and their fitness to stand trial. Mitchell persisted in claiming that his actions were part of a divine mission. He refused to cooperate with his attorneys and frequently disrupted court proceedings, demonstrating open contempt for the law. During hearings, he sang hymns and shouted religious slogans, ultimately leading to his removal from the courtroom on multiple occasions. Court-appointed experts began evaluating his mental health to determine if he had been sane at the time of his crimes. Buysey, too, argued that she acted under Mitchell's influence and at his command. However, the investigation revealed her active role in Elizabeth's abduction and abuse. Buysey not only helped confine Elizabeth but also supported Mitchell's distorted beliefs, framing their actions as sanctioned by God. The proceedings were repeatedly delayed due to debates over the defendant's mental fitness. Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed Mitchell with a delusional disorder rooted in religious fanaticism but concluded that he understood the nature of his actions and was competent to stand trial. Buysey was deemed mentally fit as well, though she was diagnosed with a dependent personality disorder, explaining her subservience to Mitchell. Buysey was the first to face sentencing. In 2009, she entered into a plea agreement, admitting her role in the crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her cooperation confirmed critical details of the abduction and abuse Elizabeth endured. Buysey was sentenced to 15 years in prison, some of which she had already served by the time of sentencing. Mitchell's trial began in 2010. His defense relied on claims of insanity, but prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including Elizabeth's own testimony. Courageously, Elizabeth recounted her harrowing experiences, directly confronting her abductor without hesitation. Her composure and resilience left a powerful impression on both the judge and jury. The prosecution argued that Mitchell was a calculating criminal who used religion as a facade to justify his heinous acts. Evidence revealed that he had meticulously planned Elizabeth's abduction and intended to capture additional victims to expand his so-called spiritual family. The court found him guilty on all charges, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and unlawful detention. In December 2010, Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This verdict marked the final chapter of his case, bringing the Smart family a measure of justice and closure. Elizabeth Smart played a pivotal role throughout the legal proceedings. Her testimony not only secured the convictions but also stood as a testament to her extraordinary strength and perseverance. By sharing her story, she highlighted the crucial role of familial and community support in the healing process. The public response to the verdicts was overwhelmingly positive. The Smart case became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of collective effort between law enforcement, the media, and the community. It also served as a poignant reminder of the need for continued improvements in protecting vulnerable children and preventing similar tragedies. After her rescue, Elizabeth Smart embarked on a long journey of recovery. Despite the horrors she endured, she astonished those around her with her determination to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Her family played a vital role, providing unwavering support and shielding her from excessive media scrutiny, allowing Elizabeth to focus on her personal healing. She returned to school and resumed her passion for music, which had always been an important part of her life. Over time, Elizabeth began sharing her story to help others who had faced similar tragedies. In 2011, she established the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, aimed at raising awareness about child abductions and supporting survivors of abuse. A significant milestone came with the publication of her memoir, My Story, in 2013. In it, Elizabeth candidly recounted her ordeal and the events leading to her rescue. The book became a bestseller and brought widespread attention to the issue of child abuse and abduction. She also became a sought-after speaker, addressing conferences and public forums to advocate for better support systems for survivors. The Smart case had a profound impact on legislation and public initiatives. Her abduction prompted the enactment of laws to strengthen child protection measures, such as improved alert systems for missing children and stricter background checks for individuals working with families. Elizabeth worked closely with national and international organizations to develop effective programs for locating missing children. Her story inspired millions, emphasizing the importance of maintaining hope even in the darkest of circumstances. In her personal life, Elizabeth found happiness. In 2012, she married Matthew Gilmore, and together they built a family. Despite her past, she focuses on the present and future, dedicating herself to charitable efforts and raising her children. Elizabeth Smart's story has become a symbol of resilience, strength, and faith. She has shown that even after enduring unimaginable suffering, it is possible not only to heal but to channel one's experiences into helping others. Through her advocacy, she continues to shine a light on the importance of protecting the vulnerable and supporting those on their path to recovery.